Now I'm ready to make these star rays using the quick corner method. I'll be using 8 rectangles and 16 squares. Make sure to put aside the other rectangles and squares for later. I've carefully pressed the diagonal on my square. Some folks prefer to draw this diagonal. Either way is correct. It's whatever is easiest for you. I take one of the small squares and one of the rectangles, put right sides together, and then I stitch down that line with a regular stitch length. I used a contrasting thread so you can see, but you'll want to use a more neutral color thread for your project. I'll follow the same procedure in this corner. Put right sides together and I'll stitch that down. I'm ready to take this over and press these corners back. Don't leave out this step because the accuracy of this quilt project, even though it's quick, depends on your cutting, sewing, and your pressing. There are 3 layers of fabric here. You may choose to leave all 3 layers. It's nice to have this rectangle as a guide, but it does get bulky when sewing seams with these 3 layers. So to get rid of some of the bulk, you could cut out just this middle piece, and you'd still have this rectangle as your guide, but I prefer to cut the excess out, and then I like to use these sets of triangles in other projects. You can use your rotary cutter for this, or you can just cut with your scissors. If I'm sewing a lot of these quick corners, I like to set up a jig on my machine to speed up this process. I did that by taking my ruler and getting it up next to my needle. And I tried to straighten it out by matching these horizontal and vertical lines. And I took a piece of tape and taped right alongside my ruler. I decided that I was going to tape on the other side. Just because sometimes I think it's easier for me to see when there's tape that's opposite of each other like this. I always like to start sewing with a scrap of fabric. Okay. When I'm using the jig, I line up this point right here with this line and sort of push it to the machine. When I do that, I'm watching, let me get this in a little bit further. I'm watching this point down here. I've got that corner lined up with my tape. And I just continue sewing like that. Now I'm ready for the next piece. I usually don't pin, but these pieces, so I can keep these 2 together, I'll put a pin in. I'm going to start right here. I'll chain piece this. Looking down at this point now, once I get it on, I want to go to the other end and watch how that lines up. I'm not looking up here at my sewing machine needle. I'm looking down here to make sure this is lined up. And I'll continue sewing. It doesn't make any difference if you're sewing this way, that's why the tape's on the other side, or the other way. You should have 8 of these rectangle units with quick corners and 4 rectangles with no quick corners. To make the star rays in the center of this quilt block, you'll need 4 of these 7.5-inch squares and the rest of the 3.5-inch squares. Mark the diagonals and then sew a square in each one of the corners. Press and you'll end up with a block like this. Lay out your block. I use a design wall, but any flat surface will do as long as you can get all the pieces in one place. I'll be sewing in rows. Doesn't really make a difference if you go vertically or horizontally. However, on these directions, the rows are sewn vertically. I'll start off sewing 2 units at a time. Put the right sides together and pin, clip, or use some other method. My method is to always hold the side to be sewn in my right hand. You can clip it or pin it, but I just find it easiest to hold it in my right hand and then always place it next to my needle. So I know that this is the side that needs to be sewn, and I will stack up all my pieces like this, one after the other, and all I have to do is run them through. I like to start off with what I call a leader, just a scrap of fabric. Sew on that, and then I take my pieces, I'll line up the sides. I want to make sure that this is lined up and these sides are lined up, and then put it down. I use a stiletto or the tips of my scissors to help push this through or guide this through. I'm sewing a 1/4 inch seam. I have a 1/4 inch foot on my sewing machine, so that makes it a little bit easier. I like to butt this up next to the other piece. This is called chain piecing. I'll chain piece this stacked together and then go back to the design wall and lay out my quilt. Put right sides together, take it to my sewing machine, and then sew. I'll continue in this manner until I have each row sewn together. Use the arrows on your handout as a guide to show you which direction to press your fabric. Put right sides together, making sure to match the intersections. At each intersection, I end up with opposing seams. This seam goes in this direction, and the seam on the back goes in that direction. Those seams want to nestle up against each other. When I feel that they're pushing against each other, I pin that intersection. Lately, I've been experimenting with gluing these intersections together using a water-soluble glue stick. Then I don't have to worry about taking these pins out when I get to the intersection. So I just pull that back, put a dab of glue in there, and sometimes it's best if you put it on both sides. Feel when they're nestled together and hold it while it sets up. When sewing the rows together, I start off with the scrap and sew my 1/4 inch seam. Make sure to remove the pin before sewing. I like to use the tip of my scissors to hold that seam in place. I can get right up in there pretty close to make sure that those seams stay nestled together. After all the rows have been sewn together, then I press. I like to press this last set of seams in one direction. Now I'm ready to square up my quilt. In the next video in this series, I'll go over the process while showing you how to add 2 sets of borders. You can find links to all the handouts in this series at learnhowtoquilt.com under free patterns. Thanks for visiting learnhowtoquilt.com. Please share our videos with your friends and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks.